Athens, the city that taught the Mediterranean to argue in public, condemned a man to death for asking questions. In 399 BC, Socrates stood before a citizen jury of his own city, charged with impiety, with introducing strange divine things, and with corrupting the young. On the surface, the indictment sounded religious, even moral. But beneath those formal accusations lay a crisis far larger than one philosopher, one courtroom, or one cup of hemlock. This was not a quiet schoolroom anecdote about a wise old man misunderstood by his neighbors. It was a political aftershock inside a wounded democracy, a tremor from empire, plague, military catastrophe, civil terror, oligarchic revenge, and a restoration that had saved Athens without truly healing it. That is the paradox at the center of the trial. Athens was not a mute tyranny allergic to speech. It was a civilization of assemblies, lawsuits, public accusations, comic theater, civic rivalry, and relentless argument. Its citizens voted, prosecuted, debated, judged, remembered, and performed politics as a public art. Its greatness had been built on the dangerous belief that the polis could think aloud. And yet, when one man made thinking aloud his life's mission, the city decided that his questions had become intolerable. The most famous literary doorway into this event is Plato's Apology, where Socrates appears before the court with a composure so severe that it has shaped the moral imagination of the West for more than 2,000 years. But the trial cannot be understood through Plato alone, because Plato writes from inside the wound. The broader anatomy of the crisis belongs to a darker archive. Thucydides, with his diagnosis of the Peloponnesian War and the corrosion of civic life under pressure. Xenophon, with his account of defeat, oligarchic violence, and the fragile restoration. And later constitutional traditions that preserve the memory of how Athens broke, reassembled itself, and then searched for someone who could carry the meaning of its fear. I am Professor Adrian Lockwell, and this is Archives of Humanity. Here, the trial of Socrates will not be treated as a marble statue wrapped in moral certainty. It will be placed back where it belongs. In the war room, in the assembly, in the law court, and on the grand chessboard of time, where ideas do not float harmlessly above politics, but move through frightened institutions, ambitious young aristocrats, wounded veterans, exiled families, restored democrats, and regimes desperate to prove that the nightmare is finally over. Because the unsettling truth is that Socrates possessed almost none of the obvious instruments of power. He had no army, no treasury, no fleet, no magistracy, no official faction capable of seizing the state. His weapon was examination. He asked what courage meant from men celebrated as brave, what justice meant from men eager to rule, what piety meant from men claiming to defend the gods, and what wisdom meant from those who enjoyed the reputation of being wise. In a confident society, such a figure may be irritating. In a traumatized society, he can begin to look like sabotage. So the central question is not simply whether Socrates was guilty under Athenian law. The deeper question is why Athens, of all cities, came to treat inquiry as a civic threat. Why would a democracy, after fighting for freedom, surviving tyranny, and restoring its constitution, kill a man whose only visible weapon was the demand for clearer thought? Before the courtroom can be understood, the ruins beneath it must be placed on the board. The trial begins long before Socrates speaks. It begins with an imperial machine, once magnificent, grinding itself apart. The fear that gathered around Socrates did not begin in a courtroom. It was forged earlier, in the rise and exhaustion of an imperial democracy that had learned to translate insecurity into power. After the Persian Wars, Athens did not merely survive the danger from the east. It emerged with prestige, ships, and a new claim to leadership. The Delian League began as a defensive coalition meant to protect the Aegean from renewed Persian pressure. But coalitions have a dangerous habit. When one member supplies the fleet, controls the treasury, and defines the emergency, leadership can harden into command. Contributions became tribute. Alliance became dependency. Protection became supervision. Cities that had once treated Athens as a shield increasingly found themselves inside a machine of payments, decrees, courts, garrisons, naval enforcement, and punishment. Here was the central contradiction of the Athenian achievement. Inside the city, male citizens participated in one of the most radical political experiments of the ancient world. Assembly debate, jury service, public pay, naval service, and the belief that ordinary citizens could govern a major power. Outside the city, that freedom was financed by domination. Tribute from subject allies sustained the fleet. Silver from Laurion helped underwrite naval ambition. The long walls fused Athens to its harbor, making the city almost an island on land. The poorer citizens who rode the triremes became militarily indispensable, and therefore politically powerful. Athenian democracy and Athenian empire were not opposites. They were partners. The empire fed the democracy manned the empire. Thucydides gave this world its merciless grammar. States, in his account, do not move by noble language alone. They move by fear, honor, and interest. Athens feared vulnerability after Persia. It honored its own glory. It pursued advantage because advantage seemed like survival. Each motive was understandable. Together, they became a trap. Then came the Peloponnesian War, from 431 to 404 BC. This was not merely a duel between Athens and Sparta. It was a systems war between rival models of Greek power. Athens commanded sea lanes, tribute flows, fortified mobility, and democratic naval manpower. Sparta commanded land prestige, hoplite discipline, oligarchic sympathy, and allies increasingly frightened by Athenian expansion. The conflict tested fleets and armies, but also finance, legitimacy, morale, memory, and the psychological endurance of citizens under pressure. Pericles had imagined a strategy of patience. Avoid reckless land battles, shelter behind the walls, rely on the fleet, and let the maritime machine outlast the enemy. Strategically, the plan had coherence. Politically and humanly, it assumed that a crowded, anxious population could endure confinement, loss, and uncertainty without civic corrosion. The plague shattered that assumption. It damaged population, trust, confidence, and leadership. Pericles himself died in 429 BC, and with him vanished a particular style of disciplined imperial restraint. Afterward, Athenian politics became more volatile. Ambitious speakers competed to define patriotism. Aristocratic resentment sharpened. Democratic suspicion deepened. Debate, once the pride of the city, increasingly became an arena where fear searched for enemies. The Sicilian expedition, launched in 415 BC, revealed the imperial mind at its most dazzling and most deluded. Athens, already trapped in a generational war, gambled on conquest in the western Mediterranean. Sicily promised grain, wealth, prestige, and perhaps a decisive enlargement of power. But empires under strain often mistake motion for mastery. By 413 BC, the expedition had collapsed. Ships lost, manpower destroyed, commanders discredited, and the aura of Athenian inevitability broken. From that disaster onward, Athens fought like a wounded giant. It still possessed courage, ingenuity, and flashes of astonishing resilience. Yet the political fabric was tearing. Coups erupted in 411 BC. Naval emergencies forced desperate financial measures. Alliances shifted. Oligarchic factions saw democracy as reckless. Democrats saw elite ambition as treacherous. Every defeat demanded a culprit. Every recovery revived dangerous fantasies. The city that had once argued from abundance now argued from dread. Socrates moved through this world not as the cause of collapse, but as an unresolved variable within it. His questions about wisdom, courage, justice, and virtue were not spoken in a peaceful republic at leisure. They were spoken in a city discovering that brilliance could coexist with catastrophe, that democracy could coexist with empire, and that victory over Persia had not delivered immunity from ruin. By the time Xenophon's Hellenica carries the story beyond Thucydides' unfinished account, Athens is no serene birthplace of philosophy. It is a battered superpower. Proud, verbal, inventive, suspicious, and exhausted by plague, overextension, faction, and war. And when the imperial machine finally broke, the next enemy Athens feared would not be a foreign fleet on the horizon. It would arise inside the city itself, in old loyalties, forbidden memories, and familiar faces made dangerous by defeat. The collapse arrived not as a single dramatic blow, but as a system failure. In 404 BC, Athens surrendered to Sparta after blockade, hunger, and the exhaustion of every strategic reserve that had once made the city seem almost untouchable. The maritime machine had broken. Spartan pressure, strengthened by Persian money and by years of anti-Athenian resentment across the Greek world, had forced the imperial democracy into submission. Xenophon's Hellenica gives the hard political outline: surrender, dismantlement, regime change. Athens had not merely lost a war. It had lost the architecture of its identity. The terms cut directly into the symbols of Athenian power. The long walls, which had joined Athens to Piraeus and therefore to the sea, were demolished. The fleet was reduced. The imperial network dissolved. For generations, ships, walls, silver, rowers, tribute, and democratic confidence had told Athenians that their city was more than a polis. It was a historical project. Sparta understood that victory required more than disarming the enemy. It required breaking the story Athens told about itself. And into that vacuum stepped one of the most dangerous ideas in any defeated society: salvation through internal purification. The 30 Tyrants, an oligarchic regime supported by Spartan authority, did not present themselves as mere predators. They claimed to be reformers, restorers, men of discipline after democratic chaos. This is one of power's oldest disguises. Violence rarely enters politics declaring itself hatred. It arrives speaking the language of necessity, order, virtue, emergency, cleansing. Under the 30, those words became instruments of terror. Executions followed. Property was confiscated. Citizens were exiled. Enemies were recoded as threats to the city. Wealth could become suspicion. Old rivalries could become accusations. The defeated polis became a ledger of grudges, and memory itself turned into a weapon. Aristotle's Constitution of the Athenians, preserved through later constitutional tradition and handled with proper caution, reflects the institutional shock of this rupture. Democracy overthrown, oligarchy imposed, civic trust shattered. Here the shadow of Socrates begins to lengthen, not as proof of guilt, but as political perception. Critias, one of the most feared leaders of the 30, had known Socrates. Charmides, another oligarchic figure, also belonged to the wider aristocratic world connected with Socratic conversation. These links did not make Socrates an architect of terror. That distinction is essential. History becomes intellectually lazy when association is treated as evidence. But politics after civil violence does not move with philosophical precision. A wounded city does not ask only what a man personally did. It asks who admired him, who gathered around him, who learned from him to despise convention, and who later turned contempt into rule. Socrates did not become a propagandist for the 30. Plato's Apology preserves a crucial episode. The regime ordered Socrates and others to arrest Leon of Salamis, an act bound to the machinery of political murder. Socrates refused and went home. In Plato's defense, that refusal showed a man willing to risk his life rather than cooperate with injustice. This was not the profile of a loyal servant of tyranny, but factual innocence does not always control public memory. For democratic survivors, the anxiety was broader than legal collaboration. The question was cultural and psychological. Had Socrates' relentless interrogation of authority, reputation, and popular opinion helped form the atmosphere in which brilliant aristocrats imagined themselves above the city? Had elite young men learned to treat ordinary civic judgment as vulgar, foolish, and unworthy? These were not yet formal courtroom facts. They were suspicions waiting for a legal vocabulary. That is the bridge to 399 BC. Athens was not moving toward a calm debate over abstract impiety. It was sorting survivors, collaborators, exiles, informers, opportunists, and ghosts. Every social tie could become evidence in a frightened city. Every memory carried a political charge. The 30 would fall. Democracy would return. But the restored city inherited an impossible equation. Revenge could restart civil war, yet forgetting felt like betrayal. Amnesty can silence prosecutions, but not memories. And when law forbids the past from speaking directly, the past learns to speak in code. The fall of the 30 did not restore innocence to Athens. It forced the city to face a harder problem than victory. What a wounded democracy does with its own memories after terror has ended. Justice demanded punishment. Survival demanded restraint. Between those two imperatives, the restored polis had to rebuild itself without turning every street, household, and courtroom into an extension of civil war. In 403 BC, democratic exiles led by Thrasybulus returned from political exile and military desperation. From Phyle and then from the Piraeus, they challenged the Spartan-backed oligarchic order that had ruled through confiscation, intimidation, and selective murder. Xenophon's Hellenica presents this restoration not as a sentimental reunion of citizens, but as a brutal political recovery after Athens had been forced to discover how quickly law could become a weapon in the hands of victors. Families had lost property. Relatives had been executed. Neighbors had informed, collaborated, hesitated, or survived too conveniently. The democracy came back to life inside a city where almost everyone remembered something dangerous about someone else. Here Athens made one of the most extraordinary decisions in ancient political history. The restored democracy accepted an amnesty. The term can sound soft, almost medicinal. In reality, it was a constitutional tourniquet. It did not heal the wound. It stopped the bleeding long enough for the body politic to survive. Aristotle's Constitution of the Athenians, in its account of the restoration settlement, points toward the institutional intelligence of this arrangement. Most political offenses tied to the recent crisis were not to be dragged endlessly into court. Certain central figures could still be excluded or punished, but the wider citizen body was, in effect, ordered not to keep prosecuting the civil war. This was not moral laziness. It was statecraft. Athens understood that if every survivor became a plaintiff, the restored democracy would consume itself from within. Every inheritance dispute could become an accusation of oligarchic sympathy. Every public speech could become a trial of memory. Every old friendship could become evidence. The city had already lost empire, fleet, walls, prestige, and a generation of confidence. It could not afford a second war conducted through lawsuits, denunciations, and revenge disguised as legality. But the genius of the amnesty carried a hidden poison. Legal amnesty is not the same as social forgiveness. A decree can forbid prosecution. It cannot order memory to disarm. It can close a courtroom. It cannot empty the private ledger of betrayal. The settlement created a pressure valve for the political system, but pressure does not vanish because authority commands silence. It searches for another channel. This is the atmosphere in which the trial of Socrates must later be placed. Not as a crude conspiracy, not as a secret council deciding to murder philosophy. The more dangerous reality is subtler. Athens had created a legal and psychological environment in which certain accusations could no longer be spoken directly, but could still be translated into safer language. Direct revenge for oligarchic association had limits. Prosecutions tied to many acts before reconciliation were constrained. Yet impiety, corruption of the young, and civic danger remained available categories. Religion, education, and youth became the vocabulary through which older political fears could speak without naming themselves too plainly. A city after civil conflict does not ask only, who broke the law? It asks, who still belongs inside the moral community? That question is rarely written cleanly into indictments. It lives behind them. It turns reputation into evidence, association into suspicion, eccentricity into menace. Athens had chosen wisely not to drown itself in vengeance. But that wisdom required parts of public memory to be buried alive. This is the paradox of strategic forgetting. Peace sometimes depends on refusing to say everything that is true. Yet human societies are not sealed archives. The unspoken returns through jokes, rumors, resentments, pieties, lawsuits, and moral panics. A democracy may decide not to prosecute yesterday's political crimes, while still punishing tomorrow's cultural irritant for reminding everyone that the wound has not closed. By 399 BC, Athens was not merely restored. It was performing stability, guarding legitimacy, and trying to prove that the nightmare of the 30 had not permanently disfigured the polis. Into that disciplined silence walked Socrates, an old citizen with no office, no army, and no formal faction, armed with something more intolerable to a frightened city than force, a method that made forgetting impossible. In the fragile silence after the amnesty, Socrates became dangerous for a reason that no statute could easily name. He commanded no troops. He drafted no decrees. He held no office. He led no formal faction. He possessed something more irritating to power and more corrosive to comfortable public life: a method. That distinction matters. Socrates was not an outsider sneering at Athens from beyond the walls. He had served the city as an Athenian hoplite, and later tradition placed him in campaigns such as Potidaea, Delium, and Amphipolis. He belonged to the polis in the severe ancient sense. Citizenship was not merely speech in the assembly, but exposure to risk on behalf of the city. Xenophon, in the Memorabilia, would later preserve precisely this more conservative image of Socrates. Disciplined, pious, practical, committed to self-control and moral improvement rather than sedition. And yet, civic loyalty did not make him politically safe. His real battlefield was not a hill outside the city, but the public spaces where Athens manufactured reputation. The agora, the gymnasium, the street, the dinner gathering, the circle of ambitious young men preparing themselves for influence. There Socrates interrogated the sacred vocabulary of civic life: courage, justice, wisdom, piety, virtue. In Plato's Apology, he presents this mission through the Delphic riddle, the claim that no one was wiser than Socrates because Socrates alone recognized the poverty of his own knowledge. But in democratic public life, that kind of humility could behave like a blade, cut through prestige. It opened reputations. It revealed that men praised as wise often possessed confidence, ancestry, eloquence, and applause, but not knowledge. Athens depended on speech more intensely than almost any city in history. Its assembly breathed persuasion. Its courts rewarded performance. Its leaders rose through rhetoric, public trust, and the visible theater of competence. Reputation was not ornamental vanity. It was political currency. Socrates moved through that economy like a tester of counterfeit coins. The scandal was not that he argued. Athens loved argument. The scandal was that his arguments could make authority look hollow in front of witnesses. Here, philosophy and politics collided. To admirers, Socrates purified the soul from false certainty. To critics, he trained young men to despise fathers, generals, poets, craftsmen, and democratic common sense. The same act could appear as moral surgery or civic sabotage. History often turns on that ambiguity. In a wounded society, The diagnostician and the corrupter can look disturbingly alike. Nor did Socrates soften the danger by climbing the conventional ladder of Athenian ambition. He did not flatter the assembly. He did not build a career through office-holding. He distrusted unexamined opinion, especially when crowds mistook numerical force for wisdom. This was not modern rebellion dressed in ancient clothing, and it was not simple hatred of democracy. It was older, stranger, and more absolute. The claim that a life unexamined by reason is not truly human, even when that life is popular, profitable, and patriotic. Then came the associations, the political poison no defense could fully evaporate. Alcibiades, dazzling and ruinous, embodied the nightmare of elite brilliance severed from civic loyalty. The Platonic and Alcibiades-related traditions, especially the Symposium, make the relationship between Socrates and Alcibiades complex, dramatic, and impossible to reduce to a crude formula of teacher producing traitor. But public memory is rarely patient. Alcibiades had charmed Athens, betrayed it, returned to it, destabilized it, and haunted it. The question in the popular mind was not whether Socrates had authored his treachery. The question was why such dangerous young men had circled around him at all. Critias deepened the shadow. As a leading figure among the 30, ruthless, aristocratic, and intellectually sharp, he represented another fear: cleverness without humility hardening into cruelty, contempt for democratic ignorance maturing into oligarchic terror. Again, association was not proof. But after civil war, perception can become evidence in the court of public emotion. Long before the indictment, Aristophanes had supplied the mask. In the Clouds, first produced in 423 BC, Socrates appeared as a comic intellectual trickster, suspended among absurd theories, teaching men to make the weaker argument defeat the stronger. It was satire, not stenography. Yet satire can outlive fact because it gives anxiety a face. By 399 BC, Socrates had become a strategic liability, loyal yet unsettling, pious yet unconventional, harmless in weapons yet dangerous in implication. Athens did not need proof that he commanded a conspiracy. It needed men willing to translate unease into charges. Soon, Miletus, Anytus, and Lyco would do exactly that. By the time accusation became procedure, Athens had done something more dangerous than merely name an enemy. It had translated a decade of humiliation, suspicion, and civic grief into a legal formula. The indictment was stark. Socrates was guilty of not recognizing the gods recognized by the city, of introducing new divine things, and of corrupting the young. In Plato's Apology, this is the charge Socrates faces. But legal language is rarely innocent after civil trauma. It compresses memory. It sanitizes fear. It allows a wounded society to speak of survival while appearing to speak only of law. Gods, youth, city. That was the prosecution's triad. And in Athens, after defeat, tyranny, and restoration, each word carried the force of an accusation far larger than itself. Miletus stands in the tradition as the formal accuser, the man whose name is most visibly attached to the case. Plato presents him as the figure Socrates interrogates, almost as a symbol of moral confidence without intellectual depth. He is often associated with poets or literary circles, though the evidence remains thin and must be treated carefully. In the drama of the trial, Miletus gives the prosecution its sacred edge. The claim that Socrates has unsettled the religious order by rejecting the city's gods and introducing strange divine agencies. That charge was not ornamental. In the Greek polis, religion was not sealed away as a private preference. It lived inside public calendars, sacrifices, military oaths, assemblies, festivals, and the shared grammar of belonging. Civic religion gave the city a sense that its political life stood beneath divine recognition. To appear to loosen that structure was not merely to question theology. It could be interpreted as weakening the city's nervous system. Athens had precedents for impiety prosecutions. Piety was a form of civic alignment. After plague, defeat, civil violence, and oligarchic terror, disorder in belief could be made to look like disorder in the cosmos itself. But Miletus alone does not explain the weight of the prosecution. Anytus mattered. He was not a proven mastermind in the modern conspiratorial sense. The evidence does not permit that convenient certainty. Yet he appears as a substantial democratic figure, linked to the restored democracy and to the world of craftsmen, commerce, and respectable public life. In Plato's Meno, Anytus bristles when Socrates presses the question of whether prominent Athenians truly know how to teach virtue. That scene is literary, not a courtroom transcript, but it captures a plausible social nerve: resentment toward intellectual circles that seem to despise inherited civic competence. Anytus gave the case political gravity. If Miletus carried the banner of piety, Anytus carried the anxiety of restoration. He could stand, at least symbolically, for citizens who had endured war, exile, danger, and the brutal memory of oligarchic rule. To such men, Socrates' association with brilliant aristocratic youths did not look harmless. Alcibiades did not need to dominate the indictment. Critias did not need to be placed formally on trial again. Their names already haunted the room. Their careers had taught Athens to fear intelligence without loyalty, brilliance without restraint, education without civic obedience. Then came Lyco, the least visible of the three. Tradition associates him with orators, though he remains more outline than portrait. Yet his presence completes the symbolic coalition. Poets, democratic respectability, public speech, culture, politics, rhetoric. The prosecution looks less like a documented conspiracy than a convergence of constituencies irritated by the same public force. The strategic power of the charges lay in their elasticity. Impiety could absorb religious unease. Corruption of the youth could absorb fear over elite education and future leadership. The city could stand behind both as the injured party. Socrates was accused not simply of mistaken belief, but of manufacturing dangerous citizens. Xenophon, in the Memorabilia and his own Apology, later answers this picture by emphasizing Socrates' discipline, piety, and moral usefulness. Later biographical traditions, including Diogenes Laertius, preserve additional stories from a greater distance. But the hard political fact remains. By 399 BC, Athens had found a language in which old fear could sound like public duty. The case now moved from rumor into the dikasterion, the citizen court. There, logic alone would not decide the matter. A wounded jury would be asked whether the man who questioned Athens could still be safely allowed inside the moral community of the city. The indictment had already compressed religion, education, loyalty, and civic memory into a single legal instrument. Now Athens needed an institution capable of turning that pressure into a verdict. That institution was the dikasterion, the citizen court, not a quiet chamber of technical law, but one of the most revealing engines of democratic power in the ancient world. For a public case of this magnitude, the jury is commonly reconstructed as 501 dicasts, ordinary male citizens empowered to judge from within the political body itself. The precise procedural details are partly reconstructed, but the deeper structure is clear. Socrates was not placed before a secluded expert who would separate law from public emotion. He was placed before Athens in human form. Hundreds of citizens carrying the memory of empire, plague, defeat, oligarchic terror, amnesty, restoration, and humiliation. Athenian trials were timed, public, rhetorical, and intensely civic. Litigants normally spoke for themselves, though speeches could be prepared with assistance. There were no modern defense attorneys standing between the accused and the city's interpretation of him. Voice mattered, bearing mattered, reputation mattered. The court was not only asking whether a legal formula had been violated. It was asking whether this man could still belong safely inside the moral community of Athens. Here lay the strategic trap. Socrates entered the trial as though truth, once tested by examination, possessed its own authority. The jurors entered as citizens of a wounded regime, asked to decide whether the relentless questioner was a benefit to the city or a danger disguised as wisdom. He answered the charge. He did not soothe the fear. In Plato's Apology, Socrates refuses the familiar arts of desperation. He does not parade his children before the jury as living instruments of pity, a gesture known in Athenian legal culture and often powerful because it transforms judgment into mercy. He does not make himself small. He does not perform harmlessness. Instead, he challenges the moral intelligence of the court itself. His defense is audacious. Athens, he argues, has mistaken its benefactor for its enemy. His questioning is not corruption, but service. The city is a great horse, noble yet sluggish. Socrates is the gadfly, sent to sting it awake. It is one of the most brilliant images in political thought, and one of the most dangerous images ever spoken by a defendant fighting for his life. To admirers, it makes Athens dependent on the very man it prosecutes. To hostile jurors, it sounds like a claim to stand above the democracy that is judging him. Then comes the cross-examination of Miletus. Socrates presses the corruption charge until its logic begins to fracture. If he corrupts young men deliberately, then he surrounds himself with worse citizens, men likely to harm him in return. That would be irrational. If he corrupts them unintentionally, then instruction, not punishment, would be the proper remedy. The argument is sharp, almost surgical. It exposes a charge that is emotionally powerful but unstable under analysis. But Athens was not a philosopher's diagram. The jurors did not hear these arguments in a vacuum. They heard them after 404 BC. They remembered elite young men who had learned to despise democratic judgment. They remembered Alcibiades. They remembered Critias. They remembered how brilliance, when severed from civic loyalty, could become catastrophe. Socrates could pressure Miletus. He could expose contradiction, but he could not cross-examine the memory of a traumatized city in the time allowed. He answered the charge. He did not soothe the fear. His treatment of death widened the divide. Socrates insists that fearing death as the greatest evil is itself a claim to knowledge one does not possess. No one truly knows whether death is harm, release, or something beyond human calculation. Philosophically, the point is devastating. Politically, it removes an expected sign of submission. A defendant who does not fear death cannot easily be disciplined by the court. That was the terrible asymmetry of the trial. Socrates argued from examined truth. The jury judged from civic survival. Neither side was simply foolish. The philosopher refused to flatter the emotional needs of a damaged democracy. The democracy mistook the pain of interrogation for the threat of treason. By the end of the speeches, Socrates had not begged to belong. He had demanded that Athens recognize the value of being disturbed. The first vote would decide guilt, but the more fateful test still waited. Once condemned, would Socrates accept survival on the city's terms, or force Athens to reveal the true price of its fear? The guilty vote did not yet make Socrates a dead man. That is the crucial hinge. In the machinery of Athenian justice, conviction opened a second contest. The penalty phase, a severe civic duel in which the accusers proposed one punishment, the defendant proposed another, and the jurors chose between them. There was no professional bench measuring degrees of guilt with detached precision. The city itself, speaking through hundreds of citizen judges, had to decide what kind of danger Socrates represented. And in Plato's Apology, the first verdict had not been overwhelming. The exact arithmetic remains debated, but Plato presents the margin as close enough that a comparatively small shift among the jurors could have changed the future of philosophy. Socrates had lost the first battle, but the gate of survival still stood open. Exile could have been proposed. A substantial fine could have been offered at once. A conventional performance of humility might have softened enough resentment to preserve his life. Then Miletus and the prosecution proposed death. At that moment, the trial became a test of translation. Could Socrates translate philosophical innocence into political language the jury could accept? Could Athens translate defiance into anything other than contempt? The entire crisis narrowed to a terrifying question. Was survival worth speaking falsely about the meaning of his own life? Socrates answered with one of the most incendiary gestures in the history of public speech. If he were to receive what he truly deserved, he said, Athens should maintain him at public expense in the Prytaneum, the civic hearth associated with extraordinary public honor. Not a prison, not exile, not disgrace. An honor. For admirers, this was the thunderclap of integrity. Socrates would not help the court pretend that a life spent examining justice, courage, piety, and wisdom was a public crime. To propose a punishment worthy of guilt would have conceded the moral architecture of the accusation. In that reading, the Prytaneum remark was not vanity, but refusal, a final insistence that the city had mistaken its physician for its disease. But courts are not seminars in metaphysics. They are political theaters where tone can become evidence. To offended jurors, especially citizens still carrying the memory of war, oligarchic terror, humiliation, and elite contempt, the remark could sound intolerable. A man convicted of corrupting the young and dishonoring the gods now appeared to place himself among civic benefactors. The same sentence later generations would preserve as moral grandeur may have landed in the court as civic insult. This is the interpretive fork at the center of the trial. Was Socrates committing a catastrophic rhetorical blunder? Was he practicing irony so severe that it became politically suicidal? Was he deliberately refusing to legitimize a false verdict? Or, as Xenophon's Apology suggests in a different key, had he already become less attached to survival because old age promised decline, weakness, and dependency? The historian must resist the temptation to flatten the moment. Socrates' inner motive is not a sealed document. It is a battlefield of ancient testimony, philosophical memory, and political consequence. Only after the Prytaneum proposal did Socrates move toward a fine, first modestly, then with friends such as Plato, Crito, Critobulus, and Apollodorus standing behind a larger sum. But the strategic damage may already have been done. The jury was no longer merely choosing between penalties. It was deciding whether Socrates still recognized the authority of the city that had judged him. And here the deepest tragedy sharpens. Socrates answered the moral question. He failed, or refused, to answer the emotional one. Athens wanted reassurance that inquiry would not become contempt, that intelligence would not become oligarchic disdain, that the young would not be seduced away from civic loyalty. Socrates offered instead the naked proposition that truth stands above reputation, and that a city may be wrong about the man it condemns. The jurors chose death. With that vote, Athens converted a dispute over speech, piety, education, and influence into an execution. A wounded democracy, seeking moral security after catastrophe, created the very symbol that would accuse it for millennia. Yet even then, the drama was not finished. The sentence had been pronounced, but Socrates' final political act would not be escape, rebellion, or denunciation. It would unfold in prison, where the condemned philosopher would confront the laws of the city that had condemned him. The machinery of execution, having delivered its verdict, was forced to wait upon the machinery of religion. Athens had sent its sacred ship to Delos, honoring the old mythic voyage of Theseus, and while that sacred mission remained away, executions were suspended. So Socrates did not die immediately. He entered a strange interval. Legally condemned, physically alive, politically defeated, and philosophically still unconquered. That delay matters. History often turns on these suspended moments. A verdict may be cast in a single day, but meaning is forged afterward, when friends, enemies, and later generations decide what the event truly was. In the prison, Athens still held the visible instruments of power. It owned the sentence, controlled the timetable. It would, in the end, control the cup. But Socrates began to control the interpretation. Plato's Crito presents the next movement as a drama of loyalty, injustice, and law. Crito arrives with a plan of escape. Friends are ready. Money can be arranged. Guards can be influenced. Exile remains possible. From the ordinary political standpoint, escape appears rational. A wrongful sentence, imposed by a frightened city, seems to weaken the moral claim of obedience. But Socrates refuses that simple symmetry. In Plato's account, he argues that injustice must not be answered with injustice. The failure of the city does not grant permission to become lawless in return. Then Plato stages one of the most powerful acts of political imagination in ancient literature. The laws of Athens themselves are made to speak. They ask whether Socrates has not lived under them, accepted their protections, raised children within their order, and remained in Athens by choice when departure had always been possible. If he now destroys their authority because one verdict has wounded him, does he not injure the very structure that made civic life possible? This scene should not be treated as a stenographic transcript from the prison floor. Plato's dialogues are philosophical and literary works, shaped by memory, grief, argument, and design. Yet that makes the passage more revealing, not less. The Crito exposes the deeper problem beneath the trial. When a city acts unjustly, what remains sacred in its laws? Socrates' answer is severe. Human beings may misuse law tragically, but the idea of law cannot become disposable the moment obedience becomes painful. Here, philosophical martyrdom begins, not as passive victimhood, but as a final strategic refusal. Socrates will not flee because flight would allow Athens to define him as the corrupter it had claimed he was. Escape would turn the philosopher into an enemy of civic order. Staying transforms him into something far more dangerous to the city's reputation, an obedient witness against its judgment. Plato's Phaedo then frames the final hours as philosophical theater. The subject becomes the soul, death, and the philosopher's lifelong discipline against fear. Xenophon's Apology offers a more restrained portrait. Socrates calm, practical, convinced, and perhaps even willing to accept death rather than endure the diminishment of old age. Between Plato's metaphysical drama and Xenophon's sober memory, the essential figure remains the same. A man determined that fear would not become the author of his final act. The hemlock should not swallow the meaning. The deeper event was symbolic. Athens could terminate a citizen. It could not terminate the question he had made unavoidable. The state possessed coercive power, but coercive power is clumsy with memory. It can silence a voice in the room and amplify it across centuries. And in that amplification, Plato inherited the wound. The execution did not merely grieve him. It radicalized his suspicion of rhetoric without knowledge, democracy without philosophical discipline, public opinion without examination, and clever speech divorced from truth. Socrates died inside an Athenian prison, but from that prison emerged the first stones of a counter-empire. Not of ships and tribute, but of arguments, academies, and a permanent accusation against every city that confuses discomfort with corruption. Athens could command the courtroom, the prison, the executioner, and the cup. What it could not command was the afterlife of the event. Once Socrates was dead, the trial no longer belonged only to 399 BC. It escaped the city that produced it and became evidence in a much larger case. The case of power against the truth-teller, and the truth-teller against the consolations of power. That is the first great irony. Athens had not executed a rebel general at the gates, a foreign agent inside the walls, or a tyrant raising an army. It had condemned an old citizen whose most dangerous weapon was examination. Yet that sentence became one of the permanent embarrassments of the Athenian achievement. The same civilization that gave the world tragedy, historical inquiry, constitutional argument, naval democracy, and the restless brilliance of the agora also gave the world the image of philosophy drinking hemlock under sentence of law. The city of argument had killed the man who made argument intolerable. The source tradition became its own battlefield of memory. Plato's Apology preserved Socrates as the man who refused to purchase acquittal by betraying his mission. The Crito transformed the prison into a drama about law, obligation, and the refusal to answer injustice with disorder. The Phaedo lifted the final hours into a meditation on the soul and the philosopher's freedom from the fear of death. Xenophon, more restrained and practical, defended Socrates as pious, disciplined, and morally useful rather than subversive. Aristophanes, decades earlier in the clouds, had helped carve the public mask of Socrates as an intellectual trickster. And behind them all stood Thucydides, not as a witness to the trial, but as the great diagnostician of the Athenian crisis. Fear, honor, interest, and the corrosion of judgment when a city has been pushed too long toward the edge. Plato's later project can hardly be separated from this wound. The academy was not merely a school. In one sense, it was an answer to a political failure. If a city as brilliant as Athens could confuse examination with corruption and moral independence with danger, then politics itself required deeper investigation. What is justice when the majority can vote? What is knowledge when persuasion can masquerade as wisdom? What is a good city when public opinion, bruised by war and humiliation, can mistake anxiety for righteousness? Yet the lesson is not the crude claim that democracy is uniquely hostile to philosophy. That verdict is too easy, and history rarely rewards easy verdicts. Athens also made Socrates possible. Its civic freedom, competitive speech, public spaces, and restless culture created the world in which his questioning could flourish. The tragedy is sharper because Athens was not an intellectual desert. It was a furnace of thought that, in a moment of fragility, burned one of its own brightest instruments. The deeper pattern belongs to every regime. Monarchies have their sacred majesty. Empires have their civilizing myths. Oligarchies have their hierarchies of blood, wealth, and competence. Theocracies have their guarded revelations. Democracies have their sovereign people, their civic memory, and their need to believe that collective judgment is not merely powerful but legitimate. Every political order builds a sanctuary of assumptions around itself. Every order eventually meets a figure who asks whether that sanctuary is a temple or a hiding place. That is why the trial survives. Socrates exposed the terrifying distance between a legal verdict and a moral truth. A court can declare guilt, cannot, by declaration alone, create wisdom. A city can demand closure after catastrophe, cannot force reality to become comfortable. Athens needed purification after war, tyranny, and civil fracture. Socrates demanded examination. One sought psychological survival, the other demanded philosophical honesty. And there, on that narrow ground, stands one of the oldest political dilemmas in human history. Every civilization has a Socrates problem. Not because every dissenter is wise, not because every question is innocent, but because societies under stress often punish the person who names the contradiction before they can bear to face the contradiction itself. The trial, then, did not end with the verdict. It became a mirror held up to political life across centuries, asking what a society will sacrifice when truth arrives at the wrong moment, in the wrong voice, before a wounded public that wants peace more than examination. And that is where the death of one philosopher becomes the judgment of every city that has ever feared its own reflection. And so the trial returns to its most severe truth. Athens did not merely execute a philosopher. It exposed the terrible alchemy by which a frightened society can transform inquiry into subversion, doubt into contamination, and the examined life into a civic threat. The verdict cannot be flattened into a moral cartoon. Athens was not a stupid city. It was one of the most intellectually fertile political communities the ancient world ever produced. A city of drama, argument, naval command, constitutional experiment, public speech, and restless ambition. Nor was Socrates merely harmless in the sentimental sense. He was not a decorative sage sitting safely beyond politics. He was a public force. He unsettled reputation. He interrogated virtue. He made confident men appear ignorant in front of ambitious youths. In a democracy recovering from war, plague, oligarchic terror, and imperial humiliation, that kind of man could appear less like a teacher than like a solvent poured onto the fragile glue of civic order. That is the tragedy. Not innocence against stupidity, not wisdom against barbarism, The deeper collision was between two necessities that every civilization claims to honor until they turn against each other: the need of the city to survive and the need of the mind to tell the truth. Athens chose survival as it understood survival. It sought closure, loyalty, reverence, and symbolic purification after catastrophe. Socrates chose examination as he understood examination. He would not pretend to know what he did not know. He would not flatter fear. He would not purchase life by declaring philosophy a crime. And in that fatal exchange, the city won the legal verdict but lost control of the historical meaning. The cost of the trial was not only one cup of hemlock. It was the stain left upon the political imagination of the West, the knowledge that even a culture built on speech can become afraid of speech, that even a democracy can confuse criticism with betrayal, that even a lawful verdict can fail before the deeper court of moral memory. The modern mirror is uncomfortable because the Socrates problem has never disappeared. Every society has sacred assumptions. Every regime, whether democratic, imperial, oligarchic, royal, or priestly, constructs boundaries around what may be questioned without punishment. In confident times, dissent can be displayed as proof of strength. In fearful times, dissent is often reclassified as disease. The diagnostician becomes the infection. The questioner becomes the enemy. The lesson is not that Athens was uniquely cruel. The lesson is that human communities often praise truth in ceremony and fear it in practice. Civilization craves stability. Yet civilization advances through those who disturb false certainty. This is the paradox buried beneath 399 BC. The unexamined city may preserve itself for a season, but it slowly loses the capacity to understand what it is preserving. And so the legacy question remains, not as an answer in a textbook, but as a test for every age. When a society feels most endangered, can it still distinguish the voice that seeks to destroy it from the voice that refuses to let it lie to itself? For more deep investigations into the crises, empires, trials, and turning points that shaped the human story, Archives of Humanity will continue opening the war room of the past. If this examination sharpened the meaning of Athens, Socrates, and the politics of fear, subscribing keeps the next chapter of grand historical analysis within reach. To continue the journey, select the documentary on the end screen, where another civilization reaches the edge of decision. And for the conversation below, one question remains. Was Athens driven more by fear, justice, or wounded pride?